everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am back with my August wrap-up. Now, in August I was feeling quite badly because there wasn't a stack of physical books piling up that I had read. But as it turns out, when I made my final list, I did read 11 books this past month, which is still extremely good going. So I will tell you about the one physical book that I finished, and it is a brick, so it took me the entire month to work through it. And then I'll get into all of the other books that I also read. The one brick of a physical book that I made it through was The Strangest Family by Janice Hadlow. And this is a biography of not just George III, but his entire family. So the first two chapters are giving you brief overviews of George I and George II, who were in fact his grandfather and great-grandfather, things I was never entirely clear about, before getting into his own life, his own upbringing, Charlotte's life, the beginnings of their marriage, their children, the ways their children were educated, and then what happened to their children later on. And of course it goes into depth about his illness and all sorts of other topics as well. This was truly fascinating. I will say Janice Hadlow does just as well writing nonfiction as she does fiction. You can see the other Bennett sister behind me. Yes, they are one and the same author. And of course I trusted her going into this. I knew she had written for the BBC and other things, so I knew she knew what she was doing. And that was very, very evident. I think had this book been slightly shorter, I think her writing style would have shown and I would have been able to say, yes, it was so easy to read. But there is so much information in this and the chapters are so long, trying to give you as much detail as you need to understand all of these complicated points in their lives, that it can get kind of overwhelming, and I found myself starting to zone out a little bit as we drug on in 50 pages into a chapter. But ultimately, I am so glad that I read this and that I own it, and I still highly recommend it to you if these I almost said character, well, they are almost like characters. They are characters in history. If they are of interest to you, or if you love the time period, I think this is very, very illuminating. Then the other books I read were all either ebooks from the library or ARCs that I was given, or audiobooks. So I'll just start at the beginning of the month and work my way through. The first of those I finished was The Art of a Lie by Laura Shepard Robinson. And this is coming out relatively soon. I'll put the date down at the bottom. I really loved Laura Shepard Robinson's early works of Blood and Sugar and Daughters of Night. I didn't love The Square of Sevens. I feel like I needed to understand the cards a bit more to understand how her story structure was mirroring that. But this one was truly fascinating. This is it's a historical thriller, really. We meet a woman who has been recently widowed, and there's some discrepancy in the way that her husband died. So local magistrate Henry Fielding is called in to investigate to make sure everything was indeed above board. Meanwhile, she is trying to keep her confectioner shop afloat. And in the middle of all of this, a handsome and charming stranger makes his way into her life. And it's a fascinating game of cat and mouse from there on. And I truly didn't see some of the twists coming. This was really brilliant and really gripping, really disturbing in parts, but utterly fascinating. Highly recommend this one. Then I finished listening to Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. I listened to this one as it was also narrated by Nicola Coughlan, who I adore as a narrator. And this is a novella that precedes the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. And it gives us insight into that first royal coven that was established by Anne Boleyn. And I thought this was going to be one of my favorite reads. I love the Tudors, as a lot of you know. I have been loving the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, and I thought the combination of those two things would be amazing. It was just okay, honestly. I think the points that it made about Henry VIII and how he treated his wives and the permission that gave to other men to also treat women abominably was really, really fascinating. I loved looking at the desperation that a lot of these women were driven to, either because they were Catholic, because they were witches, because they were in some way queer, because they were trying to maintain their grip on their social standing by any means necessary. I thought all of those moments were really, really fascinating. But in the end, I felt like we didn't have enough time with our main characters to really grow to love them in the same way that I have with the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. So it's still worth a read, but it wasn't my favorite like I hoped it would be. I am still excited and nervous to read the last book in that series, but as Nicola Coughlan is not narrating that one, I will be looking for a physical copy. Next, I read The Little Paris Bookshop by, I believe, Nina George. And this is also a translated work, which I did not realize going into it, and it was a library book, so I cannot look up who translated it, but thank you to them. And this was recommended by my cousin on the video or podcast series that we're trying to start together, so I won't say too much about what I thought about it here. I will wait until we do that fall episode, which I think will be coming out in a couple of weeks. I will advertise it on my channel once it does. Then I borrowed The Florios of Sicily from my library, and this is by Stefania Auci. This was translated from the Italian. Again, library book, so I cannot tell you who that translator was, but thank you to them. And this was because I wanted to watch The Lions of Sicily, and indeed I still want to. This is available through either Hulu or Disney Plus, depending on where you are. And it's a historical fiction series about the Florio family as they try to build themselves a mercantile empire in Sicily throughout the 19th century. And I thought the first episode of the show was wonderful. Apparently the show covers the first 2 books in this series. I believe there are 3 books total. So I thought I'd start with the first one and then hopefully get to the next one relatively soon so I can finish watching the show. I loved and didn't love this book. I loved a glimpse into an area of history that I don't know that much about. Italian history tends to be incredibly complicated because it was not unified for so long. And indeed, one could argue that it still isn't technically unified today, but that's another story. I loved the focus on the women's position in the families and how important and yet awful it was. But after a while, I did get tired of the way the men in their lives were treating them. Although, strangely enough, I didn't get the sense earlier that our main character's father was mistreating his mother to the extent that it is shown in episode 1 of the show. They could have played it up for the show. That could have been a dramatic decision. It could have been implied and I missed some things, or it got lost in the translation of the story. But after a while, Italian male misogyny does get up my nose, because that was a common theme in a thread of my own family, so we tend to have very little patience with that. And I felt like the end was rather hastily wrapped up. I feel like the disposal of his daughters happened extremely quickly. I'm sure we'll hear more from them in book 2, but just felt a bit off to me. Overall, I am enjoying it. I do want to read book 2, and I do want to continue with the television series, I'm not sure when that's going to happen now, but I will let you know as I continue. Then I listened to Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan, and I have had friends recommend this to me for years, I think literal years, and it has finally come in for me from the library and I was able to read it. This is the most meta story I think I have ever read, and I highly recommend consuming it as an audiobook because that just makes it even more meta, because it's the story of an audiobook narrator who is questioning all of her life decisions and also falling in love with a stranger. But it is written by Julia Whelan, who is herself an audiobook narrator. And then she narrates this audiobook, so it's just layer upon layer of meta. I really, really enjoyed this book. It was fun, it was deep. I don't remember it being terribly spicy, if that influences you one way or the other, but I was heavily, heavily invested in this book and I really enjoyed my listen. Afterwards, however, my hold on My Oxford Year came in for me, also by Julia Whelan, also read by Julia Whelan. And I knew it had been recently adapted by Netflix, but I hadn't watched anything about it. I wanted to find out for myself. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy My Oxford Year at all, which was really disappointing. I was hoping I would. If you're unfamiliar, it follows a young woman, Ella from Ohio, who becomes a Rhodes Scholar and is sent to Oxford for the year. She ultimately wants to work in politics, campaigning for public education, but also trying to help a female senator possibly become a presidential candidate. But she goes to Oxford to study English literature because she feels like she should. As long as she's in Oxford, this is the place to do it and to follow that passion. And the minute she gets there, she is offered a place on the senator's campaign team. And immediately I'm thinking, okay, we're going to have some sort of conflict here where she's unable to balance her academic workload and the campaign workload, especially long distance. Nope, we did not go that direction at all. Then she meets one of her professors or tutors, and there are immediately sparks. And so I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna fall in love somehow, and that's the part that a lot of people have had issues with. That even though they are both consenting adults and it's not against the Oxford code of ethics in any way, that people have claimed, well, there's an imbalance of power there. He's in charge of her grades and whatnot. I would argue that no, there really isn't, because after that point, there is no academic work going on between them that you ever see. She has one class with him, she discusses one paper about one poem with him, and that is it. And they are just having fun times in beautiful but probably ill-advised areas of Oxford for the rest of the book. So I don't even know what to say about that. Then that's progressing and I'm thinking, okay, where are we going to go with this? Then we take a swift left turn, spoiler alert. We take a swift left turn into cancer treatment and dating someone with a terminal illness. And I was not expecting that. I was not expecting the level of detail that was going to be gone into. I am very squeamish. I do not handle needles and blood very well. And at the end, I listened to the end and thought, okay, it's happier than I thought it was going to be. But why have I wasted 9 hours of my life for us to just arrive here? What was the point? I feel like there were so many other ways she could have gone that would have been more rewarding for me, and we did not do any of those. Then I read an arc of Wild for Austen by Devaney Loeser, and I was so excited. I loved her biography of the Porter sisters a few years ago, and I was so excited to hear her thoughts on Austen and wildness, and I always love any perspective that says that Jane was not the entirely prim and proper Saint Jane that she is often painted to be. And I thought the first third of the book did really, really well. That was her literary analysis and finding the moments of wildness in all of Jane's work. The first half of the biographical section I thought worked really well, pointing out all of the wild relatives that Austen had to draw upon for her fiction and things that she had personally gone through. After that, it started to feel like a bit of a stretch, and that continued into the third portion as well, looking at adaptations and the wildness there, and that it started to feel a bit thin there. But the first part of the book I thought was really well done and really intriguing and well worth it. Then on all of our very few, unfortunately, beach trips this summer, I read my copy of Saturday the Rabbi Went Hungry by Harvey Kemmelman. And this is book 2 in the Rabbi Small series. I hope I have his name right. I think he's Rabbi Small. And this was a series that I remember my mother loving when I was younger. And I believe she said they made a television series about it as well. Lonigan's Rabbi, Lonigan's Crossing, something like that. These are all set in a small Massachusetts community, and they were written contemporarily, but they were written in the 1960s. And there is a large Jewish population there, and the new rabbi moves in, and some people at the temple really like him. Some people at the temple really do not like him and are trying to get him to leave. But in each of these 2 books so far, a crime has been committed either outside the synagogue, or someone has died who was tangentially related to the community. And so the Irish Catholic police chief ends up calling in the rabbi to get his perspective and to help him try and solve this case. And they're fun, they're sweet. The title of this one refers to the fact that the murder ends up happening on Yom Kippur, which involves fasting for the community. And they're quite fun, they're quite sweet. Quite honestly, I don't think I could tell you who did it or why. I feel like that part of the novel was really glazed over. But I loved hearing the voices in this community, especially the voices of the older members, because those are voices that I always heard growing up, or I heard about growing up, and I feel like these days those voices are dying out. So it was fun having them preserved in writing. And I also like learning more about the various interpretations of Jewish law and all of the various nitpicky arguments that you could make one way or another. So if you're at all curious, I think this is quite a fun series to pick up. Then I read Ladies in Waiting, Jane Austen's Unsung Heroines, by a variety of authors, so I won't list them all. One of them I remember is Adriana Trigiani, and this is a collection of short stories to be published relatively soon, I think, where all of these American authors have taken minor characters from Austen's work, like Miss Bates, like Georgiana Darcy, like Lydia Bennet, or Caroline Bingley. All of these characters that they feel like deserve a little bit more. They want to investigate their lives a little bit more. And so they have written short stories to help accomplish that. Some of them are set within the Regency, within the universe of the novel. Some of them are set in other settings completely, be they historical or modern. And being a short story collection, I feel like some of these short stories worked better than others. There was one from Georgiana Darcy's perspective that I thought was very, very interesting. There was one about Lydia Bennet when she is a widow that I really loved. I found that one really intriguing. Others I really didn't love. There was a modern retelling mainly focused on Mary Bennet that I actually found quite sad and quite frightening. And it played on a lot of my personal anxieties, which I think is part of it, but I really did not enjoy that one at all. But if you're at all interested, I would still encourage you to pick it up, and if you do, please let me know what you think down below. And then, since I am now in a waiting period, waiting for the next audiobook in a series to come in from the library, I started re-listening to Harry Potter again, because that is something that I can pick up and put down at my leisure and not be afraid of forgetting where I left off. So in the month of August, I finished listening to Prisoner of Azkaban as read by Stephen Fry. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So those were the 11 books that I read in August. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, if you have further questions about any of these, or if you have recommendations for me based on what I mentioned here. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone!